Hello chess friends, this is FIDE Master Valery Lvov and welcome to the new lecture on the opening repertoire for tournament player. What we're going to talk about right now is one of the most popular opening systems besides first e4, and that's the so-called Queen's Gambit. The Queen's Gambit is known by everybody for the more of a positional approach that White is using, and essentially the ideas behind it that lead to a very easy to understand and slow play that many people like. I'm going to explain right now what you can expect if you want to play the Queen's Gambit yourself, and ultimately what you can do or try to do if you play as black against it. The Queen's Gambit literally starts after the first moves of d4, d5, and c4. It's called Gambit because White literally seems to sacrifice a pawn on c4. But you may not be afraid of that, because if Black decides to accept the Gambit and plays d takes to c4, he can never keep that pawn. In fact, he's only going to give away the control in the center, so basically the move of d takes to c4 doesn't do so much for him. I'm going to show you now what can happen in case of the d takes to c, which is the Queen's Gambit accepted, and of course what happens in case of the Queen's Gambit declined. The other opportunities, which are the semi-Slav with c6, as well as some other lines with e5, the counter gambit, and Albin counter gambit, and others, probably need place in a different video, as I won't be able to have them all covered within about 20 minutes. Ultimately, that's not the point, because semi-Slav is a completely different opening than the Queen's Gambit, and it has a lot of different ideas. So we want to focus only at what happens for both White and Black if Black decides to accept the Gambit, and what ultimately can go if Black doesn't accept the Gambit but he declines it with e6. Let's start first in that order and take a look at what goes in case Black plays d takes to c4. Against this very natural move, I think White should proceed with his development and bring his own knight up to f3 just in time, so that after knight f3 and Black plays knight f6, White can go for e3. Why is it so important to play knight f3? Can't White simply play and go on with a move like e4? And many chess players will say that. They'll say, well, e4 looks very good, and it almost looks like White can quickly attack on the c4 and then win. Yeah, but you see, the problem is that if we go on for a move like e3 or even e4, this move is giving Black a chance to counterattack White's center very effectively with a move like e5. And that also doesn't look pleasant, because after e5, if we get to take the pawn on e5 with our own, then the following exchange of queens, which can go with queen takes to d1, king takes to d1, or maybe even Black can play a move like bishop b4 check, bishop d2, and then there are quite some possibilities. I think Black can go on with knight e6, knight takes d5. Maybe after the exchange of queens, it is most effective, as maybe it's an endgame. Yet an endgame in which we say the queens are exchanged, the endgame is not an endgame. See, it's just a different stage in the game in which I think that White's king will feel pretty uncomfortable in the center against the fire of most of Black's pieces. So I cannot tell that the move of e5 is really too dangerous or too bad for White, although I can suggest that in case White plays something like d5, most probably, or knight f3 perhaps, let's say knight f3, Black has bishop b4 check, and also after d5 he may get c6, and some similar ideas. So it just may not be as pleasant. a5 just gives Black space, activity, and a lot of good resources. You may even consider protecting the pawn. That's right, what White wants to do with f3 is to cover the e5 square, and so after the move of knight f3, knight f6, and e3, Black, once more, he can't defend the pawn on c4. If Black tries to go for a move like pawn up to b5, I think that the best way for us to play would be to challenge those pawns. That's why I do not think that he will really have the opportunity to hold those pawns together. If Black plays b5 and White goes for a4, c6, now we can find out that trying to defend that b5 with a6 is practically impossible, as the a6 cannot take back. So ultimately Black will lose the pawn, and of course pushing or recapturing just doesn't make no sense, because I think White would take the one and then take the other, as it's a very fast way to collect protect the pawns. So the only way how black can defend is c6 with the attempt that after a-x to b he can capture with c-x to b and therefore keep those pawns well connected and probably supporting. The problem of that move, though, is that when black plays c6, 8x to b and c6 to b, white may have this very easy to follow pawn to b3. And what we understand right now is that black cannot, literally he cannot hold those two pawns together. For example, after playing with the move of b3, the c pawn cannot take, because if it takes, then there is bishop takes to b5, bishop d7, queen takes b3, and so in the end, what we find out is that black lost the pawn. He could not keep it, and in addition, he has problems. Like for example, we can see the isolated island a7 pawn, and also the pawn majority that white has in the center. So he can eventually castle, bring his own knight further, and even go for e4. That will be simply great. If you see, you can see that after e4, white may even do e5 and even e6, which looks fantastic. As more white can keep advancing in the center, more attacking opportunities he'll be having, and it is difficult to suggest that black will have anything special out there. So in quite a few moves, you can easily notice that the black queenside pawn structure is going to fail, and in some way, that's why I think that a4 makes a lot of sense. So after playing with e3, then b5 obviously cannot help black to support his own pawn. Now the other question is, what can he do? Obviously, the other move that black has available is e6. That's how he can open up his bishop, and he can get ready for a move like c5. Every single move that black can make is in order to develop, get a little bit stronger coordination, and get better. I don't think you can do that, though, because after bishop takes to c4, white already controls more space, and although black can equalize with c5, white always keeps a little upper hand. Like after short castles and move 6, a6, white can go for a4. It was a favorite move of Botvinnik, one of the world champions, who used it in the World Championship match against Petrosian. It weakens the b4 square, which black can potentially control with his knight. On the other hand, however, it radically takes away and prevents black's ability to play b5. So after move c4, so after move a4, move 7 to a4, it is all quite clear. Like after knight to c6, white can continue with queen e2. And after bishop e7, well, obviously c6 to the d's cannot win the pawn for black because white will pin. So black doesn't even try it. He wants to castle. Rook to d1, queen c7, knight c3. I think that the position is considered to be quite equal. And white is getting ready to finalize his development by opening his bishop and bringing it up to b2, while black has a bit of a difficulty, especially with this bishop on c8 that is rather interfering between the two rooks that haven't yet got the chance to connect. In a few moves, perhaps white is going to get his both rooks on the d and the c, and maybe even break through with something like d5. Well, if it's up to black how he's going to play against this isolated pawn, and many people consider that the best for black would be to exchange it. The exchange is made very importantly with the plan that if white takes back with his knight, his king is going to remain a little bit, his king's defense may remain a little bit weakened, and that just doesn't look so great. So maybe the knight needs to remain there. On the other hand, the move of e6 to the d is going to give white the ability to have e5 under his command, and probably a bit straightforward, a bit faster development, like bishop b2, rook d2, or even rook e1, with which white can actually continue improving and somewhat strengthening his pieces better. The problem is this isolated pawn, which no matter that at the moment black cannot attack in an effective manner, it's still a bit of a problem, a little bit of a weakness. And so after knight a5, maybe, and knight e5, we can say that there is a double-edged game where white will try to keep more pieces on the board and focus on bringing them right toward the king side, while black is going to try and simplify after a quick development and potentially exploit the d4 pawn to force some pressure on it. It's a good game, and I think that it's quite interesting for both sides, although I personally like the Queen's Gambit exhibit a little bit slightly better for white. The pressure that he has, and especially more activity, is always giving him an upper hand, which is more consistent. The so-called Queen's Gambit declined goes with the move of e6, and some people also call that the orthodox defense. Plan is simple. It's never a good idea to play knight f6. I mean, if you don't want to accept the gambit, don't do it with knight f6. The reason is because if knight f6 comes up, we can have c takes to the d5, and after knight takes d5, white can take command in the center by pushing with e4. Such a move like e4 and getting these two pawns all together is going to help white to even push them further and guarantee some strong attacks against black's position, in this case king. This is why black wants to play the move of e6, where the main idea is if white exchanges on d5, black will be quite ready to recapture with the e pawn, and then nicely open or get that light square bishop open so he can continue with his play. That move of e6 is guaranteeing the black at least decent control in the center and a very good support. After c4 and e6, when white plays the move of knight c3, black can now do the move of knight f6, and like of course, because he's ready now to recapture with the pawn if needed, like after c takes to the d, e takes to the d, what he's caring about is the quick way to bring out the pieces from king's side. After bishop g5, the easy move is bishop e7, e3, and castling. White can do knight f3, and now black can do knight bd7. Now we have the classical structure of the orthodox defense in the Queen's Gambit decline. White obviously has a little more space and maybe some tension in the center, although he can prove that it can anyhow give him a better position or advantage. In some way, many players now don't want to play the move of bishop d3 because bishop d3 will give black a chance to exchange, and the bishop had to lose two moves in order to capture that. Ultimately, you will need to do that, but some players like to make a couple of useful moves before they develop the bishop, so that eventually if black takes on c4, white's bishop can take in one move, and that's how he will save an extra tempo. After rook a to c1, obviously black doesn't want to exchange immediately. A move like b6, which may help the development of the bishop, is also a little risky because of that line, and the c7 that may not be so great. Most times we see the variation of c6 that helps black to create a nice pyramid of pawns that are sort of supporting each other, and they may give him some good possibilities. So c5 can happen, and c6 can happen, and after that move, white can continue with his development and bring his own light square bishop to d3. Bishop to d3, d takes to c4, and now there is bishop takes to c4. I think that so far what we find is the development of white, and especially like after the exchange of black's d5 pawn, which was a very important central pawn, although white lost the tempo, he's still having more space. Castling is certainly the next move to follow, and white would want to do e4. Maybe some of you will say now, but why is this position playable for black? I mean, it looks like he's terribly cramped, his light square bishop on c8 is bad, and the majority of his pieces look backwards. Yeah, but that's only just right now. Doesn't mean that it will remain like that forever. For example, one of the strong opportunities of black could be knight f6 to d5. It's a very strong defending system, as after knight d5, when white gets to exchange on e7, bishop takes e7, queen takes c7, and short castles, black may have a very good idea of knight takes to c3, so that ultimately, as a result of this exchange, he has the breakthrough at e5. Now we found out that while white was trying to castle and consolidate on that area of the board, black got another perfect opportunity to counter break through the center. And with the move of e5, we also understand that an exchange on this on the e5 square and knight takes to e5 is not going to guarantee white anything good. In fact, it may even get worse, because after knight takes t, queen takes t, I don't see any problem for black developing the rest of his pieces, like bringing out the bishop and getting the rook out. That's why almost nobody gets to exchange in there. In this position, white has a rich amount of possibilities, but only some of them can guarantee him a kind of possibility to fight for advantage. The move that was chosen by Grandmaster once was Queen b1. Queen b1 is a smart move, as eventually it prepares in case black pushes the pawn on e4. If he gets to push it, obviously black gets some better prospects on the king side. However, before he can really do something substantial there, he needs to bring many pieces towards that area. That, in my opinion, will be a little problematic, because on the other hand, white has the ability to line up b2 to b4, and now b5 is on the way. Coming up that way, essentially will show that after a6, a4, bishop g4, and b5 is going to guarantee white a lot of space and powerful possibilities coming up with rook to c1. Even the bishop can come near the king's side. And before black even thinks about transferring more pieces toward the king's side, white may have some very good possibilities on the queen's side. The plan will be to exchange, open files, and eventually what white is going to start is a minority attack. Now remember, the minority attack is not with less pieces against more, but rather with less pawns against more. The plan is that when we start with 2 pawns against 3, 2 out of these 3 pawns, 2 to 2, will be exchanged, and the opponent will remain with 1 extra, with a single pawn that he had out there. That will become, for example, imagine that b and a get exchanged, so black will remain with the c6 pawn. A single pawn out there that will be more of an isolated island pawn on which white can attack. It sounds very good, and if white sets more pressure on this, I think that he'll certainly get a good chance to fight for advantage. This is why often black doesn't get to play with e4, and maybe we can say the major choices for him is to go for the queen e7, short castles, knight takes to c, rook takes to c3, e5, queen b1, is to exchange on d4. Obviously, white doesn't want to take there with the knight, because in my opinion, if white wants to fight for advantage, he must always keep at least 1 pawn in the center. Doesn't matter whether it will be on the e4 or d4, but at least 1 pawn must remain there, controlling the key squares in the center. After the c takes to d, after the e takes to the d, and e takes to d, black can now choose to bring his knight onto b6 in order to open the bishop's route. Yet, after white brings that own bishop right back to b3, queen f6 and rook e1, bishop f5 and queen c1, we can consider that this position is no better neither for white nor for actually black. The point is that when white sets the rook onto the e5, white has a consistent upper hand because of the more space and flexibility, while the d4 remains as a prospect that maybe if black manages to exchange and simplify, he could attack on this pawn more successfully or more effectively. It remains, however, only a prospect, and one of the reasons is because white has a very good support, and later on, especially after getting the queen onto e3, we can see how the development and especially the ways of white to play h3 and some others will guarantee him a significant pressure and good control, or maybe we can say huge control over the different places. The Queen's Gambit exchange, therefore, turns out very interesting for white, except if we don't discuss one of the most valuable systems. Let me tell you that there was a system that made black to like the Queen's Gambit declined quite some time ago. In the 1980s, Anatoly Karpov introduced the so-called Tartakova variation in practice. The Tartakova variation goes with the move of h6 when white bishop retreats and then black plays b6. The interesting thing about this move is that when white plays rook c1 and then black plays bishop to b7, black gets the quick way to develop his light square bishop and control e4. This not only shows that after bishop d3 and knight d7 his development may go pretty straightforward, but after all, when white castles and then black plays c5, the development looks pretty decent for both white and black. The plan of black will be obviously to occupy the e4 square and probably manage his knight so that after an exchange of the two bishops, black can take back with the queen and connect both rooks. But essentially with this, I think black gets many other prospects. Karpov's favorable idea was that if white gets to exchange, black may get these 2 pawns working together and being able to control the majority of the important squares around the center. Next, the plan could be to play rook e8, to go for queen b6, and even set the queen on e6, which turns out to be a very flexible position. The rest of the pieces serve black to defend these pawns and keep them as controllers around the center. I personally think that this is a very comfortable position for black, although it remains quite double-edged and both sides have their own prospects. I like that line, and I consider that this is probably one of the best ways how black can play the orthodox, or maybe we can say the variation. So, generally, what I can give as a conclusion is if you want to play the Queen's Gambit, no matter whether you're playing with white or black, learn the main ideas and general subtleties and find out what is really important about both players when this opening happens. I think that then you will discover that in majority of times, most times, you're able to follow some very good concepts and patterns from what I've shown in this lecture, and that will help you to play it more successfully for both colors.